The ancient ruin of the Parthenon has been named one of the 7 wonders of the world and has captivated visitors for millennia since it was built in 447 BC. It's been a UNESCO site since 1987 and has been praised not only for its advanced architectural structure but its detailed carvings of ancient Greek myths. However, it's also been the site of a fierce controversy which all started when a man named Lord Elgin, and depending on who you ask, removed or stole part of the structure 200 years ago. Over the course of this documentary, I'm going to be investigating this debate from all 4 corners, trying to get to grips with why it hasn't been resolved for 2 centuries. It's going to be complicated and tough, but by the end of it, I'm going to understand this debate, and hopefully others will as well. So what are these marbles and what makes them so special? Why is the Parthenon so much more well known than other Greek temples? To answer this question, we need to get into its layout. Like most classic Greek temples, the Parthenon is surrounded by steps which puts the body of the temple on a platform. Holding up the roof of the temple are its Doric columns. This classic Greek temple design feature has been replicated in many modern buildings, including the British Museum. Now, when people refer to the marbles in this debate, what they are talking about is the frieze, metopes, and pediments. These are the important bits of the temple because they are where the sculptures and carvings are. What separates the Parthenon from other temples is that while most Greek temples only have 1 row of columns, the Parthenon actually has 2, which is what allows the temple to have both a frieze and metopes.
What was striking about the Parthenon was it was the biggest and most complex set of sculptural marble anywhere ever up to that point.
The ancient Athenians of the 5th century BC had created a monument that could never be surpassed. It was perfect.
When I was younger, what always confused me about this debate was how Lord Elgin was able to remove the marbles. Surely the Greeks wouldn't have just let him walk out of Athens carrying them on his back. To answer this question, we have to look at Elgin's career. He was originally from Scotland and was acting as British ambassador to the Ottoman Empire when he took the marbles.
Lord Elgin was very lucky in his historical moment because the British had cooperated with the Ottoman government, the Turkish government, in expelling the French from Egypt. And he was therefore, he could have asked for many favours, and the one he did ask for, which was to copy the monuments.
I think that being ambassador meant a terrific advantage, being the British ambassador, because you have to look at it in the overall geopolitical context of the time. One of his, that is the emperor's, enemies was Napoleonic France. One of Britain's enemies was Napoleonic France, and they actually clashed in Egypt. There was a direct clash point. And so my enemy's enemy is my friend, my friend's enemy is my enemy. So the Sultan would have looked very kindly on the enemy of Napoleonic France. Therefore that gave Elgin an advantage which an ambassador from another country would not have had.
An important part about this story to remember is that Greece was under Turkish occupation at the time, and to gain permission to remove marbles from the Parthenon, Elgin needed an official decree issued by the Sultan, also known as a firman. Elgin managed to obtain this firman in 1801 and began removing the marbles. So if there was a legal document that gave him permission to take the marbles, why is there all this confusion?
The main point was, if you're going to go up on the Acropolis and do anything when it is a fort, quite an important fort within an entire imperial context, if you're going to go up on that, you need permission of ultimately the Sultan and then immediately the Dizdar, the governor, the person who actually immediately runs Athens. And then thirdly, you need the permission of the military governor who controls the Acropolis. So anybody doing anything on the Acropolis who was not a Turkish soldier was going to be suspect, and it was going to be a matter of extreme delicacy. You need very powerful diplomatic contacts.
He and his agents did do a great deal of damage to the building. There's no doubt about that. And those who saw the work of removal as it was happening, which lasted over many years, were inclined to say, well, he was a butcher and sometimes a thief, and that the notion that he was improving the arts of Britain and the West was just a justification that he'd invented for what was essentially, a collector's mentality and a colonial appropriating mentality.
The issue lies in the wording of the firman. It does not specifically state that the marbles could be removed from the Parthenon, instead stating that he can dig and take excavated pieces away. So one could read it that he was only given permission to take excavated pieces and nothing else. This is also the permission his associate Philip Hump was trying to obtain from the Ottoman officials, which was to dig where they may wish to discover ancient foundations.
His terms were, of course, exceeded, because it doesn't say you're allowed to take things from the building.
But we don't know exactly what our ambassador, Elgin, was permitted to do. We have a version of one of the firmans that he was issued with.
There are also doubts over whether the firman is even real. The original cannot be found, we only have an Italian translation, and in a period rich for record keeping, some find this suspicious.
We actually don't have the original firman or firmans. The most that exists still today is a summary, and not in Turkish but in Italian, of one, and there are probably more than one originally dished out by the Sultan.
The wording of this document says nothing about taking things from the building. It allows him to take things that are lying on the ground, and many other people have been allowed to do that.
Do I think the firman was legal? Well, I think it's sketchy at best, but the real problem I have with the firman is not its contents, but who was issuing it, which was not the Greek government, but the Ottoman one. In fact, the Greek government didn't even exist. Could the acquisition of the marbles be considered illegal if the government was illegitimate?
By right of conquest, the Ottoman state was a legitimate state, and therefore since the middle of the 15th century, that bit of Greece, Athens, the Acropolis, was an integral part of the Ottoman Empire. So insofar as any state has legitimacy when it's based ultimately on force and conquest, yes, the Ottoman state was the legitimate ruler of that part of Greece.
And around that time, it so happened the Ottoman Empire had completely overtaken Greece. Now, the idea that it was a legitimate purchase by John Bruce, the Earl of Elgin, is like saying the American ambassador to the Netherlands went to Amsterdam when the Nazis had invaded and did a deal with the Nazi ruler of Holland to buy Rembrandt's Night Watch.
Do you think the Nazi occupation is in any way comparable to the Turkish one of Greece?
I think that's a cheap shot. I wouldn't myself use that analogy. The Nazi occupation of Greece was in the context of a very different world situation. And the Ottoman Empire, by the time Elgin pitched up in the late 19th century, late 18th century, was very well long established and was relatively tolerant of the wishes, the customs of the local peoples that it dominated.
Greece had been part of the Ottoman Empire since the 15th century. It had been, and there were a large minority of Muslims living there who spoke Greek as their first language. They'd been there longer than the Europeans had been in North America.
So, like many of these cases, the legal side is not as clear-cut as anyone would like it to be, and we've barely scratched the surface of the true complexity of this debate. Many people have the view that there are much stronger moral reasons why the marbles should or shouldn't be returned, and the legality under which the marbles were taken is almost irrelevant.
Greece simply was a subject part of the Ottoman Empire. So by today's international legal standards, of course, what went on then was completely illegal, or if you like, non-legal, because no one would today draw up a legal situation, a written contract, whereby one foreign power may occupy the land of another people.
It certainly would be illegal now, under various international conventions. But the Ottoman Empire was so different from a modern state that you have to historicize these things back to what they thought at the time.
So that's the legal debate, but what about ethics? The moral debate is even more complex, with so many factors changing every day that need to be taken into consideration. Do you think Greece's current economic situation as well as geographical location makes the country not well suited to look after the marbles?
No, I think Greece is very well suited to look after the marbles. The preservation of the monuments is seen very much as an international responsibility. They have a lot of funding from the European Union and from UNESCO. They get advice from around the world if they need it.
I think the world in general is an extremely unstable place, but Greece within the EU seems to me relevantly and relatively stable part of the world today. It's very important to remember the Greek Archaeological Service has been in existence for nearly 200 years. It's an extremely efficient, proficient force for the preservation, conservation and study of the remains from antiquity, especially, of course, within Greek lands.
Although many people are concerned about Greece's ability to look after the marbles, the British Museum also does not come without its share of mistreatment of the artefacts. It is one of the lesser known facts in the UK, but the British Museum actually came under fire in the 1930s for what was known as the cleaning scandal.
Cleaning is a euphemism. It's a euphemism because we're all in favour of cleanliness, but they were actually scraped. They were damaged. This happened in the late 1930s when Lord Devine, who was an unscrupulous art dealer, gave money to the British Museum to build a gallery. He was so important in the late 30s that he was given his own key to the galleries and had his own workman, his own foreman in the galleries. They simply used very hard substance, carborundum and chisels, to make about half of the sculptures that are in the gallery more white than they had been.
Here are some images detailing the damage done to the marbles. As you can see, they look far whiter than 2,500-year-old sculptures should look. When I visited the museum in November to see the damage done to the marbles, I was told by the attendee I was actually the first person to ask her about the scandal. If you go to the museum yourself, do look out for them. You can ask the attendant, or if not, look out for the marbles that look a bit more white than they should. This point got me thinking, what are the opinions on this debate in the UK? I was curious to find out, so I sent a survey around my sixth form, and the results were rather interesting. My survey got over 100 responses, and what I found was only 28% of people ranked themselves as from somewhat familiar to very familiar with the Parthenon marbles. 9% said they were not so familiar, and an overwhelming 63% said they were not at all familiar. When asked if they had heard of the Elgin marbles, the number of people who had not heard of them was even higher, with 75% of people answering no. I then asked if they were aware of the controversy surrounding the marbles, to which 69% answered no. When asked if they thought the marbles should be returned, 15% answered yes, 4% no, 11% were undecided, and a massive 70% answered that they didn't know enough about the topic to even give an answer. For the ones that could give an answer, I gave them the option to give a written explanation of their view, and the responses were rather revealing. I think that in many ways keeping them in the British Museum is better, because if they'd stayed on the Parthenon up until then they would have been just as damaged, and they've been kept safer here. Also, why has Greece chosen now rather than 200 years ago? After this much time, I think you can legitimately say they have passed into British ownership. On the other hand, I can see where Greece is coming from, because they are part of their heritage. This line I found particularly interesting because it was just plain wrong. Greece had been asking for the marbles back since 1832. This debate is not recent. Furthermore, Greece was occupied by Turkey at the time of the marbles' removal, so there was no Greek government to ask for the marbles back. Let's look at another one. Because they may be damaged in the way back, and in London more people can see them because more people are tourists to London than Greece. So the second part is definitely correct. The UK does get more tourists than Greece. The first part is not really wrong either. The marbles could be damaged on their way back to Athens. But the tone of it suggests that the person does not know that the British Museum lent a statue of a river god to the State Hermitage Museum in St. Petersburg to celebrate its anniversary. I don't believe the British Museum would transport one of its most important pieces of the collection if they didn't think it was 100% safe, suggesting there is a very safe way to move the marbles. Interestingly, both of these respondents said they were extremely familiar with the Parthenon marbles. The first respondent had not even heard of the Elgin marbles. What I gathered from this was people think they know more about the debate than they actually do, and a lot of people seem to accept that they don't really know anything about the debate at all. Of the students taking classics-related A-levels, 9% still answered they were not so familiar with the marbles and what they depicted, and 36% were not at all familiar. Furthermore, 18% of classics students were either not so interested or not at all interested in finding out more about the debate. Now I know my sixth form is not representative of the whole of the UK. For starters, it is all girls. Secondly, everyone is aged between 16 to 18, and none have completed their secondary education, let alone have gone to university. So I took to the streets of London to understand more about what the UK thought about the debate. I made sure to interview people in the roads as close to the British Museum as possible. London also happens to be the most educated area in the UK, meaning it has the highest amount of people who have completed tertiary education. Here's what I found.
Yes.
Yes, I have.
Yes. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, Elgin's marbles.
I think if they hadn't been removed, they probably wouldn't exist anymore.
They were legitimately obtained and they belong to the whole of the nation.
The British Museum keeps them really well.
Although they built their museum specifically to house them, almost immediately they had their economy just fell apart and the museum was actually raided.
I think unless the Greek people want them to be displayed in the UK, in which case that's fine, but they're Greek and they were stolen and they should be given back.
Ones that are related to Greece and Parthenon, I think that yes, they should be given back. The things inside the British Museum don't belong to the British people.
While this debate is very controversial, most of the people we asked said that they thought the marbles should be returned. This is consistent with the trend in recent years, which shows most people with an opinion on the debate think the marbles should go back to Athens. Unfortunately though, the people that had an opinion on the debate were in the minority. What was overwhelming was the sheer number of people that hadn't even heard of the marbles. Have you heard of the Parthenon marbles?
I have not. No, I have never heard of them.
No.
No, I haven't.
No.
Have you heard of the Parthenon in Athens?
Nope.
Have you heard of the Parthenon marbles?
Just now, yes.
So that's what the public think, but what do I think? Well, I'm of the opinion that they should be returned. Even if you do think that the marbles were obtained legitimately, I think the marbles will be best appreciated in the Acropolis Museum, seen in the context of the city in which they came from, not 1,000 miles away. I think that the British Museum had cared for the marbles long enough, and if they saved them, I am very grateful, but now I think they should go back to where they came from. But that is my own opinion, what I've concluded from my own months of investigating. Now that you have watched this video, I encourage you to do your own research and make up your own mind. Should the marbles be returned? Yes or no? Why or why not? Never stop learning and analysing. New information is coming out about this debate every single day. Keep your ears and your eyes open and don't be blind to new evidence. Thank you for watching.